A very good morning and a very good afternoon, a very good evening, depending on from where you are connecting, but a very good morning still here to all who have gathered here in all beautiful Oslo. Welcome sincerely to our event where we will explore IP and resolving disputes in esports. I'm Richard Frelick from the World Intellectual Property Organization, in short, WIPO, and I will have the pleasure of being your moderator for the next 55 minutes or so. For those who don't know, a quick plug-in, WIPO is the United Nations agency that serves the world's innovators and creators, ensuring that their ideas travel safely to the market and improve lives everywhere. We all are also a forum for addressing cutting-edge IP issues, and of course our data and IP information guide decision makers. And our projects and initiatives and our projects and technical assistance ensure that IP benefits everyone, everywhere. This includes, of course, the video game developers and stakeholders involved in esports, from players to tournament organizers and everyone in between. I will have the pleasure to moderate this event with Alexia, who is joining us online. Alexia, for a moment, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you from Geneva and to join you all in Norway and online. As Richard mentioned, I'm Alexia Gorica from the WIPO Arbitration and Mediation Center, or AMC for short, and it's a real pleasure to join you all today. So I will say more about this later, but just in short here, the AMC is the WIPO Center for Resolving IP and tech-related disputes, and this includes more and more cases in the esports space. I'm really happy to co-moderate this session with Richard today, and I look forward to sharing more shortly about how dispute resolution tools can support growth in the industry. So looking forward to a great discussion, and back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Alexia. So a quick overview from my side of what you will hear today. So first, the session will be divided into three parts. First, we'll have a discussion with Sergi and Daniel, who are joining us here on site, on the importance of IP and esports. Second, we'll connect with Rafael to hear about managing IP and esports with an overview around that. And finally, we'll hear back from Alexia, who will tell us about preparing and resolving disputes. You will have the chance to ask questions after our discussion with Sergi and Daniel here on site, and then at the very end, you will also have the opportunity to ask your questions. Let me just start by underlining perhaps one thing, and I love doing it, that IP is at the heart of each video game, and every video game is basically a multiverse of IP. From the music and voice acting to branding and marketing, from the code of the software to the design of the characters, from storytelling and innovative gameplay that shapes the experience, all of it is protected and enabled by IP, ranging from copyright, trademarks, patents, and many, many more. I just mentioned video games themselves, and the topic of our today's session focuses on esports, and this opens another huge and very important dimension on intellectual property. We have with us two excellent panelists today who could probably talk for hours and hours about these issues, but we don't have that much time. Let me quickly introduce them. So first is Sergi, who is head of esports at Video Games Europe, representing the video game industry. Previously, Sergi was co-founder and public affairs vice president and LVP Liga de Videojuegos Profesional. I am very sorry for my Spanish, which it's not there.
It's fine.
Which is the biggest esports company in the Spanish-speaking market, and the chairperson of International Esports Chair at Universitat Católica de Murcia. Daniel, on the other hand, is an IP lawyer with over 20 years of experience. Until end of 23, he served as the head of IP at FIFA, overseeing all IP matters, including global brand protection efforts to all FIFA World Cup tournaments. He's also, of course, a leader in INTA, currently co-chairing the 25 Presidential Task Force, and he leads Albion's Switzerland office as partner and country manager, also co-heading the company's global brand protection business. All right, Great to have you here, Sergi and Daniel, for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And let me start with Sergi. Let's kick this off with that endless question. How valuable is IP and the esports ecosystem?
Well, I'm glad that you asked me that question. Well, you've basically mentioned it. Esports are based on the public use and communication of a work that is protected by intellectual property. So the video games themselves. That's the base of esports and the use of a video game. So you can imagine that intellectual property, it's the way first to ensure that esports happen because video games happen. The creators need intellectual property, need the control of over intellectual property to ensure that they can do a series of things first, recoup the investment that they make into those products, making video games and even more video games that are a service, such as these big multiplayer video games that are used in sports competitions. It's, as you can imagine, not only extremely expensive to produce, but also extremely expensive to keep on going, to maintain. So through intellectual property rights, the creators are able to recoup the financial investment. But it goes further than that. Through IP rights, they also control the way their products are used in these esports competitions. So to ensure that that the games are presented in a way that does not conflict with values, that does not conflict with other objectives. Okay, that the creation is respected. That is also a very important matter. But I will go even farther, and this is something that is not super well understood out of the sector. But in contrast with sport, where the rules of sports are owned by no one, they are a collective creation. Okay, so there's no intellectual property over the rules of any sport. The case is that that's not true for esports for the most part. The rules of esports, for the most part, are part of the intellectual property. And I will put an example that I hope it illustrates it in an easy way. No, in the case of, I don't know, FIFA, for example, no, or in the case of football. The national federations will follow international rules to establish the size of a football field and what characteristics it will have. No, I'm not the biggest expert on football, okay, but the size or what marks should be, the goalpost, and so on. Okay. In the case of esports, the playing field, it's an artistic creation. The map where the players are competing, it's not just. It has a double reality as a first, a program, a software that is protected by intellectual property, and then as well a graphic creation so the video game developer or the publisher will decide how the size of it, how it looks, and that's part of a graphic design. Okay. So you can imagine that through IP you also control the rules of the game, which is a very specific thing. So IP is very important for publishers, developers, for the video game companies, but as well for the other stakeholders, tournament organizers, the team organizations, the players, which, of course, on one hand, they have to respect the IP of the creators, but on the other hand, they can also create their own IP, their own brands, their own content, which that alignment with the intellectual property of the video game creators sometimes can bring a series of, of tensions. But for the most part, is what is bringing the esports sector forward, what is moving it forward, IP.
Thanks, and that's a very good segue for me to still move to the next slide, which gives it a very good overview of a very simplified, although in many ways, because it's much more complex, but it's still a very good first overview of the whole ecosystem and how IP can play its part. So Daniel, could you give us this overview of the different stakeholders that can own IP in esports?
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for having me, and thanks, Sergi, for the very good introduction. And you already talked about, the big and obvious one, that the software, the IP behind it, the graphics, etc., are typically owned by the developers and publishers of the video games. And those are the first ones that people often think about, but there's a whole ecosystem built around it. That in esports drives the whole movement, but also the commercial aspects of it. So it being a sport, right, there has to be some kind of competition. And competitions are normally organized in tournaments, leagues, as in regular sports. They might look quite different as regular sports is used to, because often they take place online, etc. However, these competitions have brands, have setups that are protected by intellectual property rights. When it comes to the brands, typically trademarks, that the organizers secure, protect, in order to be able to license them out, but also, as you said, to have control over their product, if you so want to call it. And there can be other aspects if you actually have on-site events where, you might have intellectual property rights in the setup of the stages, etc., etc. So that's to tournaments and leagues. They, of course, then also use broadcasting, streaming, which is a separate kind of intellectual property right that is commercialized to create income, and typically in traditional sports the biggest one actually, how you make sure you can stage your events. Now if you go to the other side, more on the participant side, there you have the teams and the players. And the teams and the players have over time really evolved into IP powerhouses, because they realized, okay, we have an opportunity outside of just through the competition, through prize money, etc., to commercialize our brands and to actually support what we're doing. And that typically also is done through the avenue of trademarks.
Thanks so much. Maybe back to you, Sergi. So as a tournament organizer, what do you need to take into account from an IP perspective, vis-a-vis, especially, for example, of the developers?
Vis-a-vis the video game companies, you have to have the permission to organize and to communicate, to broadcast the tournament at the end of the day. From that ownership, the rest of the chain value is created. So you not only need the permission in the form usually of a license to play a video game. So most players would not be that aware. They are aware from a subconscious way that you have to tick, yes, nobody really reads, except for lawyers, nobody really reads the whole end-user license agreement, but actually you need to agree to a series of things that give you the permission to use that video game, and that extends for the whole sector. You need a license or a permission, either tacit or explicit, to publicly communicate the game, which means to organize a tournament. You needed to broadcast it. You needed to create content around it, to exploit it in any way. So there's, though, quite a bit of a difference between what would be commercial, professional tournament organizers and what would be community, grassroots tournament organizers. Because, and this is generally speaking, because at the end of the day, every company may have a different policy, and it goes worse than that. Every company may have a different policy for different games in different territories. So this makes the landscape a bit tricky and complicated to navigate sometimes. But generally speaking, for all that is community tournaments, grassroots tournaments, many companies have automatic licenses that allow you to use that video game and to broadcast that video game without any explicit permission. You just need to follow a series of very basic conditions, like, for example, I don't know, so if you are giving prizes, you cannot give prizes higher than a specific quantity, or you cannot commercialize that on television, for example. Okay, something very basic. That has a double objective. On one hand, you are creating your own community. You are building it on, and on the other hand, it's free marketing as well for your video game. For commercial tournament organizers, things tend to be a bit quite different. Okay, and also generally speaking, there are different tiers or types of licenses depending on the origin and the size of the tournament. So again, I'm generalizing because every case is different. But for tournaments that, for example, have a price that goes between one quantity and another, and that are shown on free platforms on the internet, that are not organizing any live event, or they are not having ticketing, for example, so automatic licenses may apply as well. But the bigger a tournament and for example, the more international it gets, usually the more explicit that needs to be the license, to the point that for the bigger ones, you need to actually negotiate a specific contract with the video game company. Again, this may vary from company to company, from game to game, and territory to territory, but this is, generally speaking, what tournament organizers have to have in mind, that they need to have some kind of permission to operate their tournaments.
Thanks. And by the way, another thing comes to my mind when I see some of the amazing shows which are being, the tournaments themselves, with the stages, with musicians, with the cups themselves being designed by famous companies, and all these things, by the way, are also going to be protected by intellectual property. So that amazing music we can hear during the tournament, the amazing design, whether virtual or real, can also be protected by various IP rights. And of course, then we move to the teams and the players themselves, which are an important part, of course, of the ecosystem, and they do own IP rights. And Daniel, can I turn to you about that?
Sure, yeah, and you're right. I mean, the teams and the players, especially in recent years, have become much more professional in how they can go about using their brands that they've built over the years, and making sure that they are self-sustained also, that they don't rely that much on maybe the publishers and the developers, apart from, what they're playing, of course, but they're brands of their own right. They use that, especially teams, or it started with the teams more, but in recent years, as in regular sport again, shifted a lot to players also, as they became more notorious. And they realized, okay, we should engage in protecting our IP, because it's important in brand building and in commercialization that you can get sponsorships, you can have licensing deals, that on the other side, your partners see, oh, you're doing something about it, and you have some kind of exclusivity. You've seen it a lot with some of the players, and probably the most prominent one who really went full throttle and realized what he can do with his brand, Tyler Bevan's Ninja, who started very early on to protect his IP, mainly through trademark registrations. He has, for a one person, I think about 25 registrations, which is not bad, that range from, you know, what he does, entertainment in the end, because largely his income comes from endorsement deals, from streaming on Twitch, etc., but also clothing, merchandise. He does not only have a trademark in his name, Ninja, or his game tag, he has a logo, has an additional logo for his company, but also in a claim time in that he uses a lot to exemplify how much time he puts into his craft. So he did protect all this, also to make sure, and it's, I think, very important, especially in esports or in gaming overall, that most of it happens online. There's a lot of other people that would like to benefit off of this, and you as the player can then at least control how your brand is used and act against imposters. You know, if somebody's impersonating you, has their own social media accounts up, runs their own Twitch streams, and people might think it's you, of course, looking for followers, you can shut that down pretty quickly if you have the tools in place, which, again, are based on IP.
And we are seeing lately even something that I find quite fascinating on the topic of teams and players is that up until now, or since recently, the intellectual property of the games and the intellectual property of the players did not interact that much, except at the time of playing, or except at the time of broadcasting and so on. But now we are seeing how teams and players' IP is even introduced inside the games. And for example, we've seen how this is mostly, of course, for the top tier of competitions, but how teams may have their brands applied to cosmetics inside games. So their fans can play the video game using a skin as a cosmetic for their character, for their tools, their weapons, that it's branded with their favorite team brand. Okay, so this is a recent development, but even more, we are also seeing how the brands in the form of name tags and likenesses of video game players are also being put inside the video games. One, probably the best example is in the case of League of Legends with Faker, which is traditionally considered the best ever League of Legends players in history, how his likenesses has been put in skins inside the video game. How can you buy Faker inside the video game as a skin? So this is something that I find that it's very unique of the esports ecosystem. It has also been applied more generally in video gameplay with influencers, with streamers in games such as Fortnite and others. But in the case specific of professional esports players and teams, this is something that is pushing as well forward the economy of the whole ecosystem. Before, for the most part, and it still is, the economy of esports is very much based into advertising and sponsorship, but now is diversifying also in this way that is using the intellectual property of teams and players.
No, thanks. And just for me to do this a bit of a shameless plug as well, in a way. So by using many of WIPO services, the players, wherever they are in the world, they can really more easily and cost effectively, by the way, protect their brands through, for example, the Madrid system, which is based on an international treaty agreed by many countries. So there's a lot of tools out there that can be used to protect your brands as a player, as a team. But of course, this goes way beyond. I promise a moment of seeing if there's any questions from the audience, and that is the moment where I'm looking at all the participants here in Oslo. Sorry, not in Oslo, in Norway, but as well as looking online. And if there are no currently questions, I'm gathering that everybody is thinking on all the things they want to ask until the very end. We'll also have a moment for that. And in that case, let me still turn now to Alexia, who will moderate a part of the event down the road now. Alexia, over to you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for the great discussion so far. So we will now turn to the second part of our session, where we will hear a bit more about how IP is managed in the esports space. For that, I'm very happy to welcome my colleague, Rafael Ferraz-Vázquez, the legal officer at WIPO's Copyright Law Division. Rafael has worked on copyright and digital content issues at WIPO for over 10 years. And he's joining us online today to talk about how copyright and IP rights are applied, licensed, and sometimes even challenged in the world of esports. So over to you, Rafael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexia, and thanks to you and Richard for moderating the session. It's a pleasure to share this panel with Sergio and Daniel. So, as we already heard, the video game is at the center of the esports activity. Even also now, we have a number of growing IP from other stakeholders, right? Such as tournament organizer that might register their trademark, the players that might seek protection for IP for some of their content that has a growing commercial value. So esports, although again the video game is a fundamental requirement and it has a multitude of IP protecting this content from different elements of the video game in order to ensure that this multi-million investment not only in creating but curating and maintaining this video game to enable the esports activity leads to a number of IP that those stakeholders might sometimes find themselves on asking themselves on how to harmonize the different ownership, the different IP in an esports event. So the very basic thing is that everyone that is part of this esports environment needs to have clear and specific understanding of the conditions on especially the commercial activities that they undertake in esports, be it, for example, a content creator, be a tournament organizer, or even a sponsor and brands. So for players, it's very important to understand that the fact that they acquire a license to play the video game as a consumer, as a user, does not mean that they can undertake a lot of different acts within the esports activity. And they need to make sure that when they go beyond playing the video game in their private environment, that they understand the acts that they are doing from an IP perspective and even from a business perspective, right? So if they, for example, associate themselves and stream and have sponsorship over their activities, that might trigger conditions that they are not allowed to undertake without the authorization of the publisher or the video game company. So this is very important, as the number of content creators related to esports and video games in general is growing significantly, especially in around the world, and also the importance of the commercial significance of those activities are also growing as the fan base continues to expand, and of course sponsors and brands also like to jump in the opportunity to communicate to this fan base that are highly involved in the esports. So with the growth of esports, a number of team organizations and tournament organizers are involved and also protecting the IP and managing the IP around esports. Some of those activities are authorized by the video game publishers, and here he mentioned that it varies according to the publisher, to the right owner, and also to the territory, to the video game, and even to the type of activity. Some of those activities, especially if they have a community aspect and with lower commercial significance, they are actually allowed, and that is made clear in the website of the publisher, where they say the conditions where the organization of the tournament is already allowed without the need to ask for further authorization. So those small tournaments are mostly allowed, and if someone is organizing a tournament, they need to seek and understand those conditions in order to apply in practice. In other conditions, there is a way to seek that authorization, and there are preconditions to facilitate the authorization from a publisher. So certainly we see that a number of video game publishers and the right owners, of course, would like to foster the development of esports around the world. And in some cases, it's quite straightforward for stakeholders to actually obtain and ensure that they are following and respecting the IP rights of the video game publishers, with the conditions being very clear in terms of participation, in price, in broadcasting, streaming, and in the type of sponsorship that the tournament organizer might have. So this is also important for those stakeholders that engage into commercial relationship with sponsors of brands, in order to avoid infringement that can actually be very can bring a damage either to the team, the player, and the other tournament organizer, in case there is a lack of authorization that leads, for example, for the cancellation of a tournament or for an IP infringement on the part of one of those stakeholders. And having said that, being protected by IP rights that are owned by those that created the video game, there's a number of relationships between the different stakeholders of the esports environment, from the publisher to developer that created and maintained, for example, the servers of the video game, to the players, teams, tournament organizers, sponsors, brands. And they all have, of course, enter into contractual relationships in order to enable this exploitation of the different business models in the esports. For example, in entering or fostering different business models, such as sponsoring and advertising, and this could be a number of different sponsorships, from sponsorship to the tournament, sponsorship to teams, private personal sponsorships to players, and so on. You also have, of course, the possibility of merchandising, the broadcasting and streaming, and cases where there is agreement related to data involved in the esports. And as I mentioned, depending on the conditions of those agreements and the characteristics of the business models, or how the video game is being used in that business model, either the IP of the video game is not used, or used according to one of those licenses that are pre-approved by the publisher, or the right owner of that IP will need, of course, to authorize the exploitation of their IP rights, some of the exploitation of their IP rights, establishing, of course, the conditions. And here, the typical conditions in IP contracts, such as the territory, the time, another type of conditions, such as remuneration, and so on will need to remain clear for those involved in the exploitation and authorization of those IP rights. And again, as esports become more and more relevant around the world, especially with different activities and tournaments being created and expanded, it's important that everybody involved in the esports understands the consequences, the importance, and also how to manage the IP in order to successfully exploit the esport activity. And that's why we're at WIPO, with a partnership with the Video Game Europe, who are looking to make it clear, for example, for players and tournament organizers on how to manage that IP in a successful way to foster business models and to foster the continuation of the expansion of esports around the world. So in terms of players and managing the IP, there are a number of key issues, for example, to understand the content ownership and licensing, the issues of monetization and revenue sharing, for example, the cases of foreign art and game modifications, and of course, understanding when it is an authorized use of material protected by copyright from the video game, and the cases of trademark infringement, trademark that is, of course, very much important for brands and sponsors, right? And from the perspective of tournament organizers, a number of key elements that are important from them related to IP is, of course, to secure the license to use the video game in the way that they had foreseen in the tournament, to develop a proactive IP strategy, not to, of course, have last-minute problems because they did not obtain the authorization for the type of uses they foreseen, to have contracts in place, and of course, by the time all those stakeholders beyond the video game publisher also protect the IP, become right owners of IP, of course, they also start to have an interest in protecting the IP and in enforcing to avoid that other stakeholders use the IP without the authorization. For example, a tournament organizer might have the interest to control the trademark of the name of the tournament to avoid that third parties, for example, associate themselves with the tournament without being true. So those those two stakeholders will, the teams and players and the tournament organizer will certainly benefit from the upcoming publication that we are finalizing between WIPO and Video Game Europe. I hope all of you have access to that in the near future. And of course, I'm available for any question you might have. Back to you, Alexia.
Thank you, Rafael. So I will take the next few minutes to talk about, as you may have seen in the schedule, how we can prepare for disputes in games and the esports sector in general, and how we can resolve them better. I will continue along the same vein as Rafael, and I will mention some tools also that WIPO makes available for stakeholders to use. But let me start with a quick observation. I mean, all the speakers have mentioned so far along several lines that we're talking here about an industry that moves fast, faster than most really, an industry that nowadays is almost 100% digital, and it's deeply collaborative. So let me add to that we're also talking about an industry where conflicts are inevitable. Now, in many industries, when there is a dispute, the first instinct is to go to court. But in games and esports competitions in particular, this is not always the best option, and often it is not a realistic option for reasons that have already been mentioned so far, let me add. So there are a few reasons for that. We have discussed quite extensively that this is a global industry, so studios, platforms, players, and organizers often work across borders or even fully online, as Daniel mentioned. So that creates confusion over which country's courts will have jurisdiction or even on which law applies. We can have, let's say, a developer in Tokyo, a publisher in LA, a player in Germany, a tournament which took place fully online. So the question arises, where would you even file a claim in the case that there is a dispute? Second, court proceedings take time. So in most jurisdictions, they can last for years. And by the time a judgment is issued, the game or the competition in that case might already be in its next season or no longer relevant. Moreover, courts may not always have the specialized knowledge, so we may encounter judges in jurisdictions that do not fully understand the technical or commercial realities of the industry, about which the previous speakers have already talked. And finally, litigation is often costly. So for indie studios, for example, or mid-sized tournament organizers, or even individual streamers or players, pursuing a claim in court may not be a viable option at all. So in short, litigation can be slow, sometimes too expensive, other times too complex, or too rigid even for what the sector needs. And this is where alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, may come in as a more realistic option. I mentioned already in the beginning that I work with a arbitration and mediation center of WIPO. So here we have worked for quite a few years, for almost 30 years now, on resolving IP and tech-related disputes through ADR. ADR may encompass a variety of methods, so we talk about mediation, arbitration, expert determination. I will not delve into the specifics of its procedure. Suffice to say here that we have also noticed with these years of experience that games and esports in particular bring unique challenges. And this is why we identified the need for tools that are even more specialized. And this is where a new tool comes in that is called the International Games and Esports Tribunal, or IGET. So IGET is a relatively infant initiative by the a joint initiative by WIPO and the Esports Integrity Commission, or ESIC. It's a sector-specific ADR framework that we created following also consultations with stakeholders from across the industry. So contrary to what I mentioned a few minutes ago about court litigation, and contrary to what applies on ADR in general, if I may say, there are some things that make IGET different and perhaps a bit more suitable for disputes that may arise here. So first of all, we have put together a specific rule set, which draws inspiration to a great extent from the WIPO ADR rules that have been in place for a couple of years, but adapted specifically for games and esports. So we have tried to reflect there the realities of digital content, licensing models, cross-border activities, and platform-based ecosystems in particular. Moreover, the cases that are brought for resolution before IGET are handled by neutrals with knowledge of the sector. So we have put together a list of arbitrators, of mediators, and experts, which have been selected not only by virtue of their legal skills, but also based on their industry-specific expertise. The proceedings are also confidential to a great extent, which may matter a lot, as you understand, in an industry where the reputational risks are quite high. And they are also flexible in the sense that based on what the parties tell us, we can have fast-track proceedings that take place fully online, and in general, proceedings that are adapted a little bit to match the scale of the dispute and the subject matter at hand. Moreover, we have tried to put together the proceedings in the way that are cost-effective and accessible. I mean, I mentioned already that this is a not-for-profit initiative, and the costs are usually scaled based on the nature of the dispute and the value of the subject matter that is brought for resolution. We try to encourage the conduct of the proceedings fully online, especially when parties come from all over the world. And that encompasses the filing of the case, to the hearings, to the resolution, which is also another factor that can keep the barriers quite low. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, if I may say, the IGF offers a forum that is neutral and international, and also avoids to some extent the risks and the uncertainties even of going to court in foreign jurisdictions. Now, that in terms of the proceedings. In terms of subject matter, we have tried to design a forum that will be able to handle basically all types of disputes that may arise in the industry. So we talk, of course, about IP-related disputes, such as the ones Rafael talked about and the previous speakers, including copyright, licensing, trademarks, characters' rights, etc., etc. Classical commercial issues, such as revenue sharing, merchandising, or sponsorships. Contractual disputes, and here we see quite a few disputes which involve players and teams, or players and tournament organizers. Platform-related issues also, such as issues pertaining to streaming or takedowns, content removal, etc., etc. And what we characterize are stricto sensu competitive or integrity-related issues, where we have leveraged quite a lot the experience that the Esports Integrity Commission brought to the table, because we, as the part of WIPO and the AMC, as you understand, brought the biggest chunk of expertise when it comes to IP and commercial issues. So, to circle a bit back and to wrap up what I wanted to say, I mean, you saw in the title of my presentation that we talked about preparing for the resolution of disputes as well. So, in all honesty, I mean, you understand already by the multiplicity of stakeholders involved, like disputes will happen. And that is also part of doing business, not only in the esports field, but in general. But if we are smart about preparation, we can make sure that they're handled quickly, fairly, and with the right expertise. So my first advice is simple, that preparation is key. Stakeholders need not wait for a conflict to appear before thinking about the resolution. Being proactive, using clear contracts, which include clear dispute resolution clauses, and in particular, clear ADR clauses, is key. Dispute resolution clauses that will specify where the disputes will be resolved, under what rules, in what language. To that end, for example, we as a WIPO AMC, but also IGF, provide model clauses that the users can easily adapt. It's also important for stakeholders to know their options. I mean, I spoke quite a bit about ADR in general and IGF in particular, but it is important for stakeholders to be aware of these options, and in that sense, being able to choose the process that makes more sense. For example, when it comes to ADR, mediation can be great for preserving relationships and reaching a more amicable resolution, while arbitration can be more akin to court litigation and provide a final or binding decision when needed. So, all in all, planning early saves time. It can protect relationships and help projects move forward when there is a disagreement. And that was all on my side. So thank you very much. Looking forward for your questions later on, and I will give the floor back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Alexia, and thank you so much, of course, Rafael. This is the moment we promise to open the floor up also to questions from the audience, both the ones here, both here in, with us, as well as those joining online. I'm first having a look at the room here. If there are any raised hands, there is someone coming up over to the mic.
Hi, my name is Kenneth, and I've previously was with an media and entertainment conglomerate focusing on public policy and government affairs. But I want to ask my question as someone who observe esports tournament and catch streamers live stream. So one of the most common complaints that stands out to me most during their live stream is lamenting about how they couldn't use like copyrighted music, they couldn't use like all those tools, etc., because their video will get demonetized like when they upload to like certain platforms or do their live stream. So my question is, how can the esports ecosystem or the IP community help elevate each other so that the entire ecosystem are more aware about the value of the copyright or intellectual property, so that like, because IP is sort of interlinked, so I guess it's also important for them to understand how limiting one part of the intellectual property could eventually impact, let's say, their income, and especially when especially esports players might not be there for creation, they just want to have fun or have some economic value. So this mindset going into sort of creation might be different from what we have been looking at for artists or authors. So it would, I would love to have your take on how to increase their awareness, especially when they have such a global reach and the global reach to young audiences. And when when the young people grow up, hear about all those complaints and lamenting about copyrights, I don't think it's a good development and prospect for the IP community. So we'd love to have your take on that.
I don't know if this question also connects a bit with the one that we had online. Don't you think so?
Yes, and I can read the question which you also already received online. So EULAs and user license agreements are treated as licenses imposing restrictions on various aspects of the game. These restrictions might not always relate directly to the game's underlying IP, but can include things like requiring permission to upload gameplay video, even if the footage is the player's own, or to organize tournaments. Can these restrictions be considered void, given that EULAs are usually written in a way that an average player would love to have constructive knowledge of the restrictions imposed on them?
So I will start with this final one, which probably I cannot answer because I'm not an IP lawyer. Maybe I don't know if Daniel will be brave enough to, because it's a very, very highly technical. But from a practical point of view, actually there's not an issue, because as I've mentioned before, for the most part, and I would say it's practically universal, video game companies will allow the use of the game for broadcast reasons and for broadcast, I mean for free online streaming reasons and for community tournaments for free and automatically. You will only face a problem basically if you are, I'm simplifying, but basically if you are commercializing that. And if you are commercializing that, I'm sorry, but you are not a player, just, you know, an individual player that is just having fun. Okay, you are planning to have you are basically acting as a business. And on the other hand, if you are doing something that is basically catastrophically bad, I don't know, using, for example, adult content together with the game. Okay, even in that case, it will not apply. It will not directly involve the video game company. It will involve mostly the streaming service. So the question is, I think, from the point of view of theoretical, very interesting, but currently it has very limited practical implications, because the players are allowed to do all that, and they are not seeing any issue. And answering to the in-person question here, I think that the situation has changed a lot in the previous 10, 15 years. I think that there's more literacy right now among players, and especially the top tier, and on the topic of intellectual property. As our colleague Rafael from WIPO has mentioned, together with us, with Video Games Europe, we are helping with the publication of a guide for players and tournament organizers, which of course it's aimed mostly to either the non-commercial or the more community-based, or to those that are, let's say, starting a business more than to the elite and to the professional tier. So wrapping up, I think that, or what I would say is that the sector has adapted quite well to a situation where there's a highly engaged community that just wants to share their passion for those games, and that does not feel, I mean, all those licenses, all those issues are actually transparent for them. The issues come when you are trying to mostly when you are trying to make a business out of it.
And maybe adding to that, and I fully agree, we also, in my practice, we don't see a lot of issues when people come and ask, what can we do, right? And then you look into the restrictions that maybe publishers put on their games, it's always about commercialization. It's never, or ethics, right? Or inappropriate behavior. Otherwise, the publishers are aware you're the customer, you're the fan, right? They want to push that, and they also know that you're disseminating their games. You know, you're making them more popular and driving their profit or their community. However, I think there's this weird interaction where a lot of people online will complain about, oh, my stream got shut down for one reason or another. Oh, I only used something that might be protected by IP and suddenly it got taken offline. But people should also be aware, why are you doing it? A lot of them are trying to commercialize. So they have to be aware of IP and the restrictions, because on the flip side, they would use the same reasoning once their business takes off. So there is an interaction between the two. And sometimes, but it can be unfortunate when really people are trying just to have fun, that through automated processes, some, you know, IP protection kicks in and just shuts things down. That happens, but, you know, there has to be found the right balance, I guess.
I see that Rafael also raised his hand. Rafael, over to you for a moment.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Just along the same lines of Serhi and Daniel mentioned, and I just wanted to thank both questions. I think they're very interesting. Regarding the question in the chat, I just when he mentioned that the end user license agreement restricts some issues that were not really related to IP, I think it's quite the opposite. When we talk about organizing events and streaming, that is very much related to the IP in the game. So tournament organizers will, of course, want to associate themselves with the video game by using the trademark, by using the characters, by using other images and art created for the video game, and that is protected by IP, either by trademark, either by copyright, either by other means. So you will, someone undertakes that, they are using the IP in the video game, and same as broadcasting or streaming the gameplay of the video game, even if it is tolerated in many occasions, as he and Daniel mentioned, is still the use of the IP on the video game, right? The same way that broadcasting a movie or broadcasting a TV show, it's using the IP over that movie or that video show. So it's very much related to the IP, and I think what is clear and what is mentioning in the licenses for user when you purchase a license to play is that what you authorize does not include those activities, but it is very much linked to the IP. And related to the question from the gentleman in the venue, I think it's the same question we came up with. How can we make clear the role and how to better use IP in esports to avoid the pitfalls, for example, for a content creator to have the content demonetized, or for a player to not longer to be able to compete professionally because of an IP infringement, for a tournament organizer to avoid any problem in organizing the events or making agreements with sponsorships and brands. And we hope we're gonna provide at least a partial answer, a partial solution, if not a full solution to that need to bring IP into discussion for the esports community.
Thanks, Rafael. Daniel, I'm sorry, I would love to give you the voice, but I'm very aware of that red clock going almost over time. So before finishing, just let me also underline that one important part always for us in WIPO is that we make sure that everyone everywhere is aware of how they can benefit from intellectual property. And that means also the small game developers from every corner of the world who are developing esports titles. This is the players from all corners of the world who are creating their brands, are making, and they all can and should be very much benefiting from the intellectual property system. So aside from EGET, aside from the upcoming guide, we have also a lot of materials that are available from WIPO, and we are trying to exactly empower those small developers, those small, the beginning players who don't yet have the knowledge on how to protect their brands, how to protect their images. This is something, the materials there, you have the links as well, so I'm putting up that on the screen. And with that, we are past the time. It's 0:00. I'm having the signs being shown. So just let me end by, first of all, thanking my panelists here who have joined us, and of course, thanking also my colleagues from WIPO who have also joined us online. Let me just end by emphasizing and underlining that in WIPO we really continue to provide initiatives that will help all the innovators, all the creators, all the entrepreneurs in esports and beyond. And we look forward to working with all our partners from across the world, from across the industries, to make sure that also everyone everywhere can benefit from IP. Thank you for your participation and looking forward to some coffees. Thanks. Thank you.